Welcome to the Creek Institute. I would like to share with you some views and insights about the new frontiers in climate finance. My name is Lionel Martellini. I am a professor of finance at EDHEC Business School, and I'm also the director of EDHEC Risk Institute. Okay, so the presentation will discuss 4 different topics. First of all, I will emphasize that climate change can and perhaps should be viewed as an economic problem. And then I will discuss the impact of investment decisions on climate change before turning to the impact of climate change on investment decisions. And finally, I will share with you some concluding thoughts on climate change as an opportunity for the investment industry. So why are we making the claim that climate change is an economic problem? Well, let me quote this statement from William Nordhaus. William Nordhaus, as you might know, is a Nobel Prize-winning economist. He is on the faculty at the Yale School of Management and is perhaps best known for his work on climate economics. And here is what he says in a very interesting book called The Climate Casino. He says, most people think that global warming is a question for the natural sciences. However, in reality, the ultimate source and the solutions lies in the realm of the social sciences. And by social sciences, he obviously thinks about economics. Okay, so let's try and understand why is it the case that the ultimate source of climate change is to be found in economic terms. Well, climate change is an economic problem. Climate change is actually an economic growth problem. And again, let me quote again William Nordhaus, virtually everything we do involves directly or indirectly the combustion of fossil fuels. So if you look at this graph, what you see is on the orange line, the GDP per capita, the world GDP per capita. And if you look at the greenish bluish line, then you see the production of oil. And again, it's globally. And what you find is that the trend in those two series are very much in sync. In other words, it is clearly obvious that the production of oil and therefore the consumption of oil is clearly highly correlated with changes in GDP. So in other words, it is the economic growth which is fueling our needs for consuming oil and gas and other sources of CO2. There's another way to think about CO2 emission, carbon emission, and economic growth. If you look at this graph, which shows in billion tons of CO2, the global emission of CO2, so global, worldwide. And this graph starts very early on, starts somewhere by the Industrial Revolution of the 18th century, where there was virtually no emission of CO2. And then gradually, as we move towards 1850 and then 1900, 1950, and then much more rapidly after Second World War, we see a massive increase, massive uptake in CO2 emissions. Now, this curve, which shows the increase in carbon emission over the last few centuries, is an ever-increasing curve. It keeps increasing again, which of course is the reason why we are currently sitting at this very complex situation. Now, there are only very few cases where we find a small decrease or a relative decrease in CO2 emission, and all of those times happen to coincide with times of economic crisis. So we are talking about World War II, we are talking about the recession in the 70s due to shocks to our prices, we're talking about massively here, if you look at carbon emission in 2008, we're talking about the subprime crisis, and then we see that there was a decrease in carbon emission. It's small, but it was there. Now, if you look at 2020, well, we see a substantial decrease in carbon emission. I mean, the updated estimates have now been set at 7%. So it turns out that 7% is what we have estimated to be the decrease in CO2 emission in 2020. Mostly due to the massive economic impact of the COVID crisis and all the lockdown situation in most developed countries. Now, just to put things in perspective, this reduction of anywhere between 5 to 7% in CO2 emission happens to be exactly what would be needed as per the 2015 Paris Agreement in terms of yearly level of reduction of CO2 emissions up until 2030. So in other words, we would need to see for the next 10 years an annual decrease of something around 6% in terms of CO2 emission if we are to meet the target level of emission for the Paris Agreement. So in other words, it takes a amazingly strong economic downturn, generated by the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, to experience a decrease in CO2 emission of the order of magnitude of what is needed now to meet the challenge of global warming. So in other words, we are looking at a very, very complex situation where carbon emission reduction will have to be massive if we want to be able to meet these target levels as per the Paris Agreement. Now, let's take a look at how investment decisions can have an impact on climate change. After all, if climate change is a problem of economic origin, it may not be entirely surprising that we can turn to finance to try and find a way out of this problem, or at least to find a way to mitigate, the emission of carbon at the global level. Well, let's think about climate change as a negative externality. So here is, again, following up on the quote from William Nordhaus, a simple way to understand where climate change comes from. The problem is that those who produce emissions, CO2 emissions, do not pay for that privilege, and those who are armed are not compensated. So what we're seeing here is up until now, carbon emissions were not internalized in economic transactions. So whenever you fly around the world, whenever you buy a flight ticket, well, you are not paying for the cost, the implicit cost of carbon emission. You're not paying for that. Everything goes as if your right to emit CO2 while you are traveling the world, this right was granted to you for free. So in this context, economists have a very simple and effective way to think about how to deal with climate change, given that climate change is generated by CO2 emission. We just need to internalize this negative externality. By internalizing, we mean we should reflect the cost and the price of carbon emission within economic transactions. So in other words, economists would suggest that we need to put a price to carbon, to make it expensive to emit carbon emission, and that would be a very effective way to curb carbon emission. There are different ways to try and deal with this problem. So the most direct way is to introduce regulations such as carbon taxes. And carbon taxes will make it expensive for people to actually consume, for example, gas when they drive cars, and that will increase the cost of gasoline that they use to fill in their car, and because of that, there will be an explicit cost of carbon emission. Now, we all understand that introducing taxes for consumers is extremely difficult at a time where the economic situation is not exactly simple for most consumers. And France was a very good example with a Yellow Jacket movement of a spontaneous, outbreak, political outbreak that was triggered by an attempt to introduce a carbon tax. that attempt, as you know, has been eventually removed to try and calm down the situation. So direct regulation, carbon taxes, it's an effective way to tax consumers, but that might be a bit tricky from the political standpoint. An alternative would be to develop a market initiative developing carbon markets, CAP, so-called cap and trade. So in a few words, in the context of carbon markets, what happens is we grant a number of allowances to companies, and these allowances can be thought as permits to emit CO2. And there we are trying to have a tax that would apply not to the consumers, but to the producers, to the companies, in other words. So the way these markets function is we set a cap which define a upper bound, a maximum limit of carbon emission. And then there's a trading system in place, which explains that if a given company has not consumed their entire allowances, in other words, if they emit less than what they are supposed to emit, they can sell these carbon allowances to companies that would have been emitted more than was allowed to them. So that's a fairly smart way of developing carbon markets and introducing an explicit price for carbon. And the price for carbon will be set through supply and demand in that particular carbon markets. Such carbon markets exist in different countries, different regions around the world, and the European Union is the region in the world where this has been the most actively developed. Now, there's something else that can be done as well, which is coming directly from investment decisions, which is increasing the cost of capital for carbon-intensive activities. What we're suggesting here is that asset owners, institutional investors like endowments, pension funds, insurance companies, and other large institutional investors, they can try to massively divest from companies that have a high carbon footprint to invest instead in otherwise comparable companies that do a better job at reducing their carbon footprint. Well, if that is happening on a ground scale, which is exactly what's taking place as we speak, if that is happening on a ground scale, then this initiative will push the price of the companies with a low carbon footprint. They will push the price of these companies upward, and they will push the prices of the companies that have a high carbon footprint downwards. And as a result, we would see an increase in the cost of capital for carbon-intensive activities and companies involved in those carbon-intensive activities. So that's yet another fairly effective way that by which investment decision can have a big impact in terms of increasing the cost of carbon emissions. So the mechanics, as we said, is you measure carbon footprint for companies. That's step number one. It's not an easy task. There's actually different ways to measure the carbon footprint of a company and all these methods and measures of pros and cons. So that's not exactly easy to measure carbon footprint. But there's a whole business now involving data providers who are trying to focus on generating this kind of accurate estimates for carbon footprint. Now, assuming that we have a good estimate for carbon footprint, then we set a target level of reduction as an investor in the carbon footprint of the portfolio. So let's say that I commit to reduce the carbon footprint of my portfolio by 50% as a pension fund. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to optimize my equity portfolios in such a way that money will flow away from companies with a high carbon footprint. As a result of that, as we said, the price of these stocks will go down relative to the price of stocks with a low carbon footprint. And therefore, the cost of capital will go up for these companies that have a high carbon footprint. Okay, now this mechanism is actually extremely effective, and the good news is that this mechanism has already been put at work, is currently massively engaged by a large number of some of the largest institutional investors around the world. Now, this raises two questions at least. The first question is, what's the impact on expected returns? Well, if the cost of capital goes up for the company with a high carbon footprint and the cost of capital goes down for the companies with a low carbon footprint, with their prices going up, well, that must imply that from the investor perspective, these companies with a low carbon footprint, their prices have gone up, and therefore expected return should have gone down. So in other words, what we're saying here is there must be an opportunity cost involved in low carbon investing for investors. So if you are a pension fund and if you care about having an impact on climate change and you divest away massively from those companies that have a high carbon footprint and invest in those more expensive companies that have a low carbon footprint, then you should be willing to accept that you are going to enjoy a lower performance, a lower expected performance on that equity portfolio. So there's an opportunity cost, and the trade-off that should eventually be involved is, how much performance am I willing to give up as an investor in an exchange for my willingness to impact climate change to try and help facilitate the energy transition. So that's an important question for all investors around the world, including institutional investors, but of course also individual investors. Now, there's another question that can be raised as well, which is the debate between divesting versus active ownership. As opposed to moving money away from companies with a high carbon footprint, what we could try and do, we could try and stay invested with those companies and try and exercise actively our shareholders' rights and try and steer those companies, influence those companies so that they can reduce their carbon footprint. After all, if we move away massively investment away from companies that need to transition towards a low CO2, low carbon emission model, how can these companies find a way to finance this transition, right? So there's a trade-off here as well, where we need to think carefully about whether we want to divest from those companies or we want to stay invested but try and provide incentive for these companies to decrease their carbon footprint. Now, what we've been arguing for a few minutes and making these compelling arguments that we could have an impact as investors, that finance can have an impact on climate change, that we can help finance low carbon investing projects, and therefore we can have a strong impact on business model for these companies and provide them with a strong incentive to try and reduce their carbon emissions and their carbon footprint, more generally speaking. Now, it is perhaps equally important for the investment industry to also think about the reverse question, which is not the impact of investment decisions on climate change, but the impact of climate change on investment decisions. So what we're seeing here is, after all, it has to be expected that climate change will have a massive impact on asset prices. And let's be careful here. Let's be clear. We are not only talking about very specific companies that will be directly impacted by the physical impact of climate change, whether it is, increased probabilities of hurricanes, of droughts that could have a direct impact on the production chain for some companies. No, we are talking about something much more general. We are talking about the cost of the transition towards a low carbon economy that will impact all companies, whatever their sector and whatever the region in the world. Let's think about it this way. We really definitely need a war effort to fight climate change, right? So in the same way that during World War II, it was all about trading food, trading butter and bread for tanks and weapons that we would use to fight the war. Well, now we are going to be trading butter and bread and food and all those good consumption, goods that we enjoy for wind turbines or whatever more effective alternative source of energy that we need to put in place if we want to succeed in decreasing carbon emission. So clearly there are two types of effect. There's a size of the pie effect and a slice of the pie effect when we think about the impact of climate change on asset prices. Let's start with the size of the pie effect. Well, the world will be poorer because of climate change. In other words, we are going to have to spend money to adapt to the impact of climate change. And also, there will be all of these mitigation costs where it's going to be extremely costly to try and change the business model of all of those companies and the production chain so as to reduce carbon emissions. This eventually will materialize in a decrease in the equity risk premium because the pie itself is going to be smaller because of all of these costs involved in this energy transition. So in other words, we should try, and that's not an easy task either, but we should try to find a way to come up with improved estimates for the equity risk premium that do take into account climate scenarios, right? So depending on how aggressively we are engaged in the fight against climate change, there will be different scenarios, and each one of these scenarios will lead to outcomes in terms of equity risk premium. So that's the size of the pie effect. But of course, beyond the size of the pie effect, there's also a slice of the pie effect. In other words, for a given level of wealth or global wealth or production, the split will, the impact on the split will be different across sectors. So there will be winners and losers in different sectors, right? That's something that we can only expect. And we need to be able to estimate exposure of different companies and different sectors with respect to changes in carbon prices. We need to be able to come up with risk estimates that incorporate these climate scenarios as well. So both from the performance standpoint and from the risk standpoint, new tools are needed to inform investment decisions with respect to, impact of climate change. Clearly, climate change matters for stock markets. So whether we are actively engaged in trying to fight climate change through our investment decisions, or even for those investors who do not actively seek to impact climate change, they have to recognize that they will be impacted by climate change. The whole world and stock markets, for that matter, will be impacted by climate change. Well, if we want to take a quick example of why and how climate change matters for stock markets, it may be worth taking a look at Tesla. We know that Tesla has been enjoying an insane upward pressure in terms of stock prices, and the market cap of Tesla is now reaching levels that are just amazing, and Tesla has become very, very quickly one of the largest companies in the world. Now, if you compare the market cap of Tesla, well, that market cap of Tesla happens to be as big as the combined market cap of those massive car producers such as Toyota, Volkswagen, Mercedes, General Motors, BMW, Honda, Fiat Chrysler, Ford, Nissan, and Subaru. So that's crazy. A single company that does not even produce many cars actually has a market cap which is equal to the combined market cap of all those traditional car producers that are producing, many more cars, right? So clearly, there are many reasons why that can try and be, analyzed to try and understand why the price of Tesla stocks have been going up so fast. But clearly, the fact that Tesla is well positioned with respect to climate change, the fact that Tesla is the leader in electric cars, and that there's a good understanding that electric cars, even though they raise their own problem in terms of carbon footprint when producing these batteries in particular, but there's a good understanding that electric cars are going to be involved in the solution to climate change. That certainly explains, at least partly, why Tesla stock has been going up so strongly. So clearly, climate change can be a threat for some companies, an opportunity for other companies, but there will be an impact, positive or negative, for all stocks. Well, precisely, that will be my concluding thoughts. We may want to think about climate change as an opportunity for the investment industry, right? I mean, climate change is a formidable threat and challenge that is facing human race. I mean, there's a good case to be made that this is perhaps the most formidable global challenge that we have faced as a global, as mankind, right? But at the same time, it is an opportunity. It is an opportunity to step up, to get together, to fight back. It has been a great opportunity for multilateralism, which has been, of course, questioned massively in some countries, but which is coming back strongly throughout the fight against climate change. And when turning to finance, it is an opportunity for the finance industry to show some of its relevance. And we all know that the finance industry has been heavily criticized, and sometimes for good reasons, for its excesses. And the subprime crisis was partly driven by an excess of leverage in the financial system, and the kind of leverage that was not sustainable. Now we look at things slightly differently. Now is a unique opportunity for investment and the finance industry in general to show some of its usefulness and relevance. And by the way, it is also an opportunity for young graduates who want to make a difference, right? So if you are preparing to get a job in finance, well, it turns out that a wealth of exciting new job opportunities in climate finance. And you know what? Beyond climate finance, most traditional finance positions will require a good, strong understanding of and awareness about climate change. And whether you are involved in climate finance or not, if you are involved in the financial decision from the corporation standpoint or from the market standpoint, a keen understanding of the science, the engineering, the economic, and the finance implications of climate change will give you a strong edge when it comes to your relevance in the professional world. Well, this is the reason why we have decided to launch this new program, MSc in Climate Change and Sustainable Finance, and we are very happy to do this with our colleagues at Mines ParisTech, and more precisely with the Center of Applied Mathematics at Mines ParisTech, which is one of the leading research center in the field of energy transition and modeling of climate change and the energy transition. And it is definitely our hope and ambition that we will be able to provide a 360 global understanding to these happy selected students entering the program, a 360 understanding of all aspects of climate change, including the scientific aspects, the engineering aspects, and of course the economic and financial aspects. Thanks for your attention, and I'm very much looking forward to more discussions on this exciting topic of climate finance.